Well, consequential events breaking out of South Africa, where the Constitutional Court has made a final judgment in the case of Jacob Zuma and declared that he is ineligible to serve in parliament. Now, what are we talking about? Jacob Zuma, a former president of South Africa, member of the African National Congress, who's never formally left the ANC, but is supporting the breakaway Mkhonto party, or the MK party, fashioned after the so-called liberation movement's armed wing formed by Nelson Mandela back in the early 1960s. But the MK party he's supposedly head of. Now, this party splashed on the scene a few months ago and was making huge inroads, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, against the ANC. But over the past 2 weeks, it's begun imploding after its founder, Jabulani Khumalo, was dismissed from the party. And then he turned around and dismissed Jacob Zuma, who's technically not even in the party. And it gets pretty murky from there. Bottom line is that the MK party has been losing steam over the past 2 weeks. And now, what will happen? Will we see violence in South Africa? Let's hope not. I'm not predicting violence this time around, but there are going to be a lot of very angry South Africans, particularly Zulu, who believe that he's being persecuted and will use victimhood. Now, the interesting thing is that Justice Leona Thron, who opposed the contempt of court decision in 2021, she was against it, said previously, just a week or two ago, that the Electoral Court making the judgment that Zuma was eligible would be contravening the Constitutional Court, which isn't possible. So Leona Thron delivered a unanimous judgment today, penned by herself, overturning the Electoral Court's earlier decision that set aside the Electoral Commission of South Africa's finding that Zuma was not eligible to stand in the elections for his new MK party because he'd been sentenced to 15 months in prison for contempt by the Constitutional Court. Now, Zuma will not be representing the party in parliament. He cannot serve. As I've said all along, this is common sense. You just read the Constitution. His face does remain on the ballot, which is a big drawing paper for the MK party. And the ballot paper is already printed, so there's no changing of that. And voters abroad over the past weekend already voted with Zuma's face on the ballot. So let's see what happens going forward. Now, to recap what happened, on June 29th of 2021, Jacob Zuma was convicted by the Constitutional Court of contempt for defying an order to appear before the Zondo Commission. And he did it repeatedly. Also got up and walked out of the Zondo Commission hearing. He was very contemptuous of that body. Section 47, paragraph 1, subsection E of the Constitution disqualifies anyone who is convicted of an offense and sentenced to more than 12 months imprisonment without the option of a fine from serving in the National Assembly. But it also adds that no one may be regarded as having been sentenced until an appeal against the conviction or sentence has been determined or until the time for an appeal has expired. In other words, if you're convicted by a lower court of a criminal or civil action, then you have to have the time to make an appeal, and there's a period for that appeal. Well, in this case, there is no higher authority than the Constitutional Court. Therefore, there is no appeal. And Jacob Zuma and the MK party hung their hopes on that. The other aspect of this that MK and Jacob Zuma were going after was the so-called remission, when Cyril Ramaphosa immorally gave Jacob Zuma and 15,000 convicted criminals a reduction in their sentence, arguing that the jails were overflowing and there was no space for them. This is a naked effort to appease Jacob Zuma and to calm the country down after the July insurrection of 2021. Now, the Independent Electoral Commission had brought an urgent application after the Electoral Court found that Zuma was eligible, which is nonsensical. So the IEC and several parties as friends of the court filed amicus briefs to go to the court. The court has now made a decision 9 days before the election. Wow. Thron said the Electoral Court had erred in finding Zuma's conviction by the Constitutional Court was not a conviction contemplated by Section 47, and that a remission of the sentence was irrelevant, which is what I said. The Constitution says nothing about remission or a pardon. It says conviction. It doesn't say that that sentence goes away. You were convicted, and that makes you ineligible for parliament. And that's the bottom line. The remission really is not germane. Now, here's an interesting conclusion in the judgment. Thron further said that the apex court found no difference between a conviction for a criminal offense of contempt and a civil conviction. That is interesting. If, in fact, that's true and the ANC finds itself in the minority in the future government, there's an awful lot of accused criminals in the ANC who could be convicted of civil charges and would find themselves ineligible for parliament. Now, folks, it takes courage to stand up to the potential backlash this is going to lead to. Courage in the face of fanaticism, and that's exactly what MK is. The Mkhonto party is a fanatical party. Moral courage to abide by the law. Well, it's either that or instructions from the ruling ANC to get Jacob Zuma off the ballot. But I'll err on the side of moral courage on this one. So once again, folks, today, May 20th, 2024, just 9 days before South Africans go to the polls to vote in person, Jacob Zuma declared ineligible and cannot serve in Parliament, which is what I said previously. Now, interestingly, that statute says it's for a period of 5 years. Inside the Constitution, Section 47. So Jacob Zuma was convicted on June 29th, 2021. It's now 2024, so he's ineligible to stand. However, we know that in Parliament, members of political parties are appointed to 200 of the seats based on proportional representation. So the party decides who sits in Parliament. Jacob Zuma, technically, legally, I'm pretty confident, will be eligible to serve in Parliament on June 30th, 5 years after his conviction. So 2026. So 2 years from now, if he's still around, still drawing a pulse, Jacob Zuma could very well be sitting in Parliament. A lot can happen between now and 2 years, but technically that may be the case. Well, folks, there you have it. Jacob Zuma declared ineligible by the highest authority in South Africa, and it is good to see the courts not captured and adhering to the rule of law, because that's what a Supreme Court or a constitutional court's role is, to interpret the Constitution and actions to make sure that they are in accord with the Constitution. The Electoral Court's judgment was an error, and the Independent Electoral Commission was correct when it stated that Zuma was ineligible, and that's what the court found today. Jay-Z will remain on the ballot, but will not be serving in Parliament. There you have it, folks. Good luck, South Africa. 9 days away. It's going to be a bumpy ride.